From the Fox Studios in New York City, this is Maria Bartiromo's Wall Street.
And welcome to the program that analyzes the week that was and helps position you for the week ahead. Happy July 4th weekend. I'm Cheryl Casoni, and for Maria Bartiromo. It is reportedly a make-or-break weekend for President Biden as he kicks off a swing state blitz in Wisconsin and taped a rare and highly anticipated national primetime interview with George Stephanopoulos, all in desperate efforts to try to shore up dwindling support. This despite pressure from members of his own party to drop out.
I just ask that he be honest with himself about the situation, what he faces, and what the impact will be on history.
I actually don't see a path now for President Biden to stay in this race in the long term.
Mr. President, please look at what's happened. Recognize that the reality out there may not be the same thing you're hearing from the circle of your closest friends and family, and consider putting our country first and putting aside your personal interest and make that tough decision like Lyndon Johnson did under different circumstances to step aside and let us get an energetic new candidate.
And Biden's got troubles with his donors, too. Hollywood showrunners and top Democratic donors, in particular Damon Lindelof, have called on Biden to drop out of the race, and he's asking donors to withhold funding. He says he'll, quote, double the size of the checks if Biden leaves the race. Reed Hastings, Abigail Disney, also halting donations to Biden. One group of donors is reportedly working to raise as much as $100 million for a sort of escrow fund called the Next Generation PAC that would be used to support a replacement candidate. Even The Economist has turned on him, featuring a presidential walker on the cover of their latest issue. And here's what voters have to say.
I think they should do a swap out for another candidate.
I do think he should bow out because I don't think you should have a person like that running for a leader of your country.
He doesn't seem with it. I don't even think it's his age. Like, I don't mind his age at all. It's like literally questioning his health and his cognitive health.
If you can't see he's unfit for office, you're crazy. The guy is just not there.
Joining me now, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, it's good to see you. Sources are telling Fox there is a letter that's being circulated among Democrat lawmakers calling on Biden to leave the race if he can't kick concerns over his mental acuity. What are you hearing from your Democratic colleagues, and what do you think is the significance of him kicking off his rehabilitation tour in your state of Wisconsin?
Well, Cheryl, good to be with you here today. First of all, we're on recess, so we're not talking to Democrat colleagues other than what we hear in the media. Now, obviously, I think President Biden is going to desperately try and cling to power. I think he and his wife, his family, like the position. They like being in the White House. I think one of the rationales also with Hunter being in legal jeopardy, and quite honestly, Joe Biden could be in legal jeopardy as well. They want to be able to, have that next 4 years, potentially pardon Hunter. So again, they have a number of reasons why they would want to stay in power, but I think it's a desperate act. I don't think it's going to work. I've been predicting, or I've been certainly saying since last summer that I had a really hard time believing Joe Biden would be their nominee. And literally, I've been saying for the last 3 to 4 years that as troubling as the Biden scandals are, his corrupt family, his obvious mental and physical decline throughout his entire presidency, what's even more disturbing is the corruption within our federal agencies that have been covering up for him, that he has weaponized. And even worse is the cover-up of the mainstream media, the corruption, the complicity of the mainstream media. Now all of a sudden, the mea culpas are coming out here where, hey, we've been seeing this, so why haven't we been saying anything about it? It's because the media, by and large, are not staffed by journalists anymore. They're staffed by advocates for the left. And they've been covering up for his disastrous policies. They're really destroying this country, the open borders, and they've certainly been covering up for his infirmities and his corrupt family.
And that seems to be where a lot of the anger is coming now, headed towards the White House, his staff, for protecting him, the bubble of Biden, some are calling it. And there is blame being put on some in the media as well, to your point. So President Biden is set to host 31 NATO leaders in Washington next week, celebrating 75 years of the alliance. It's going to be a week of photo ops, dinners, typically unscripted Q&As. There's going to be a big press conference, we know. He'll be solo. All things Biden, though, was just slammed for, skipping out on when he went to the G7 summit in Italy last month. There's now reports leaders were, quote, shocked to see his lack of focus there. So what do you expect from him next week when he's not only on the world stage once again, but he's going to be hosting this major event? How high are the stakes, do you think, for the United States?
What I'd like to have NATO ministers talk about is, in retrospect, go back and say, how do we go from a position in the early 90s, the fall of the Berlin Wall with perestroika and glasnost and cooperation between then Russia and the West, getting rid of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, getting rid of nuclear waste in Russia, Russia accepting the fact that there needed to be U.S. troops in Europe to maintain stability, to now we have a bloody stalemate, a proxy war between the West and Russia. Rather than bringing freedom and prosperity to Ukraine, much of Ukraine has been destroyed in this bloody stalemate. And Vladimir Putin is not taking the use of nuclear weapons off the table. So what NATO ministers ought to be looking at is what went wrong? How did we lose the peace? People were writing back in the 90s about the end of history. History is in flames right now because I think an awful lot of bad decisions on people on all sides. And rather than continue to push more and more arms, threatening more use of arms into Russia, which is only going to increase the risk of nuclear war, we need to figure out how can we step back from the brink? Now, how can we end this bloody stalemate and try and come up with a better solution than what we've been pursuing over the last decades?
Right. Well, another big piece of news this week is you see a lot of these Democrats going after the Supreme Court now. And then next week, you've got AOC. She's vowing to file articles of impeachment against conservative judges. She is criticizing their decision to grant partial immunity to former President Trump as a, quote, assault on democracy. While your Senate colleague Elizabeth Warren is again calling to expand the high court, with Chuck Schumer slamming what he's not calling a MAGA court that has undermined its own credibility. And according to recent analysis, this isn't the case. In fact, out of the 49 court decisions in this term, only 11 were decided along ideological lines. What do you make of this push from those on the left?
Well, first of all, FDR couldn't pack the courts because America was outraged by the concept of doing that, as well as the mainstream media wouldn't let FDR get away with that. So now the left-wing media pretty well sits back and allows people like AOC and Elizabeth Warren to openly talk about packing the courts without any kind of pushback. So it's entirely possible. It's what is definitely at stake in November if, for example, Democrat nominee wins and they get the majority in the House and the Senate, kiss America goodbye. They will pack the court. They will turn additional, whether it's Puerto Rico, D.C., into states so they can get 4 more Democrat senators. They want a one-party nation. They want power forever. They're trying to crush dissent. That's why they're weaponizing the federal government against ordinary Americans. So no, be very afraid of what Democrat governance will do, and you can bank on the fact that what Democrat governance has already done is literally put this nation on a path of destruction. We need to defeat these people.
Yeah. All right, Senator Ron Johnson, thank you for your time. It's always good to see you.
Have a good day.
Well, jobs in June higher than expected, but we continue to get hit with revisions for the previous months. Bob Nardelli and Steve Moore on the actual health of the jobs market and what it means for the economy. That's next. And here's a look at where markets ended the first trading week of the second half of the year as June saw a hotter than expected jobs report. The economy adding 206,000 jobs, topping the 190,000 estimate, but down from last month's revised 218,000. The unemployment rate unexpectedly ticked higher, hitting 4.1%. And we got more revisions. April and May showing 111,000 fewer jobs were added than previously reported. Joining me now is former Chrysler and Home Depot chairman Bob Nardelli and Trump economic advisor Steve Moore. And Steve, I want to start with you on these revisions. Month after month, we get new numbers, 111,000 fewer jobs. That's a substantial hit.
Well, it sure is great to be with you, Cheryl and Bob. A pleasure to be with you as well. And probably nobody has their finger on the pulse of the labor market more than Bob Nardelli. But I will simply say this, that I don't buy this characterization that this is a hot jobs market right now. I think we've definitely shifted into a lower gear. I'm not saying we're headed to a recession, but I am saying the economy is slowing down a lot. We're seeing that both in some of the GDP numbers and also in the employment numbers. One particular problem that I've identified, Cheryl, in the jobs numbers, and there are a lot of problems here, but if you look over the last about 14 or 15 months, the biggest employer, the biggest source of new jobs has come from government and health care. And my goodness, we have a federal government that's running a $2 trillion deficit. They shouldn't be hiring workers. We should be dramatically reducing government employment. So we want to see more of the people who are making things in the American economy getting jobs, but that just isn't happening. So I don't view this as a bright or rosy picture with the labor market right now.
Bob, what is your assessment of the job market right now?
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl, for having me on. And Steve, thank you for the compliment, but you're really the smartest guy on here today. Look, I just want to add to Steve's comments. I call that number, Cheryl, deceptively correct. As you pointed out, every month it gets adjusted. So the 206,000 jobs, again, Steve is right. The second largest employer last year was the government, and they're back on the same track again this year. There is no GDP generated by government jobs. And what was totally absent in that chart you just showed, where's manufacturing? Last month there was 2,000 less manufacturing jobs. The unemployment rate is up year over year. The number of unemployed is up year over year. You know, and this is all attributed to this administration, Cheryl, in my opinion. What I'll call is like inflation is like carbon monoxide. It's the silent killer that's creating job problems and the quality of life. It is pervasive. People are still using dynamic pricing, Steve, to your point, and we're continuing to suffer under reckless spending that's causing these problems in our economy. It's stressing the fault lines in our economy, and whoever gets in that White House next year is going to be hit with a wrecking ball to try and pull this back, Cheryl.
And those are two different types of messages coming from each of our presidential candidates right now. And speaking of, President Biden did announce an executive action earlier this week. The White House extending overtime protections for 1 million salaried workers who make less than $44,000 a year, but that's up over $8,000 from the previous salary minimum. And then on January 1st, the threshold's going to raise again to more than $58,000 per year. Bob, what do you make of this and its effect on this particular segment of the workforce?
Yeah. Well, 2 points on that. I think I saw during your show this past week, $58,000 was the average, and they're saying you almost need $160,000 a year to survive based on the inflation and the cost of living today. Point one. Point two, Cheryl, every job has a different wage rate to it, right? And I'm all for cost of living and adjustments for families to have an affordable life. You know, we saw 40% wage increases earlier this year through union negotiations. But this is not equitable. This is not equitable in that if you have a lower skilled job, why are they going to get paid more than someone with higher skills because they're both working a couple of hours of overtime? So, again, I'm not sure this is equitable, and I'm not sure this is an appropriate way to increase the standard of living for our families today. I think there's other things we should be doing. Steve's point, we got to pull back on this reckless spending. We got to get inflation under control. I saw today, Steve, where automobiles, the auto industry is going to lower prices to try and offset the interest rate people have to pay for cars. And that's just not going to work.
Yeah, and we've been seeing that in the CPI report, to your point, Bob, in particular the cost of auto insurance. And as long as interest rates are sitting where they are, that's going to continue to be a problem. And then, Steve, White House spokesman Andrew Bates earlier this week was touting July 4th gas prices expected to hit the lowest level in 3 years. But get this, in actuality, it was just a 1 cent drop in prices compared to last 4th of July. You have to almost laugh. The Biden administration tapped the SPR again this week. They sold 1 million barrels of oil from the reserve because obviously, Steve, this is a political story. In an election year, you want to keep gas prices lower.
Well, look, when Trump left office, the price of gasoline was somewhere around $2.30 a gallon. Under Biden, over the last 3.5 years, the average price of gas has been about $3.70 a gallon. So you're paying about $1.50 a gallon, basically kind of a Biden gas tax because of his policies. So let's not forget, Cheryl, the first act that Joe Biden put into effect when he was named president was killing the Keystone XL pipeline as part of his war on American energy. So I find that to be indefensible. One other quick thing, when you were talking to Bob about the regulations, you may have seen that just this week Joe Biden said that, you know, what we're going to do about higher grocery prices is we're going to investigate grocery stores. I'm not making this up. Investigate grocery stores for price gouging. I mean, come on, he's blaming the inflation that's due to his, $3 to $4 trillion spending spree on, 7-Eleven stores, grocery stores. Everybody's responsible except for himself.
And that's the gaslighting that we've seen on the policy side. And then, of course, this past week we've gotten more gaslighting on the health of the president and his cognitive abilities. Steve Moore, Bob Nardelli, it's great to speak with both of you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Don't California my Tennessee. Why residents of one Tennessee town say they are living in hell because of the blue state exodus driving more residents to their town. I'm going to talk to the mayor. Coming up next. The blue state exodus spreading to Gallatin, Tennessee, a town 30 miles north of Nashville. Gallatin seeing an over 13% jump in its population since April of 2020. And its county is also enjoying an economic surge from the mass migration. Sumner County's economy growing 8.5% annually between 2020 and 2022, putting it in the top 7% of all counties for growth in the U.S. Gallatin Mayor Paige Brown joins me now. Mayor Brown, most of your new residents have moved from, well, blue states like California, Illinois, and New York. I have to tell you, my Fox Business program, American Dream Home, we did an episode on Gallatin. It is a beautiful place. I can see why people want to move there. But why do you think they're coming to Gallatin?
Well, I appreciate that. And when we speak of Gallatin, I really think it's very similar to what's happening all around Nashville and to some degree across Tennessee. There are people that look at the tax burden of living in Tennessee, the quality of life of living in Tennessee, and they look to a place where they can have a better life, and so they come to Tennessee. And interestingly, we talk about this exodus, don't California my Tennessee. I heard that in your tease, and I think there's some of that, but I think the dynamics are far more complex than that, because I think the people who are coming here are largely very conservative. In fact, we're seeing a lot of I'm more conservative than you are going on, and it's just very, very interesting how things are happening with something that's never happened before in history in our country.
Well, it's not just Gallatin that it's happening to. We've seen this trend happening in other states. In Texas, we're seeing this. We're seeing this in parts of Kentucky, the Carolinas. But you do have longtime Gallatin residents that are slamming this wave of blue state newcomers. They say, hey, don't California my Tennessee. Cute. One commissioner says that they, quote, live in hell because traffic has gotten so much worse and the developers are buying up a lot of farmland. They want to build new homes. And now you've got residents in your town that are pushing for restrictions as these home prices skyrocket, and that does push up the higher cost of living. So how do you respond to those residents' concerns?
Well, I don't think the consensus of most of our residents is that they live in hell. I think they are largely very, very happy living in the communities that they live in Middle Tennessee. The challenges are there. The traffic certainly is something that people are not very happy about, as you can imagine. But if you've lived other places, our traffic doesn't compare. I've been in far worse cities and much, much worse traffic. We're not around Atlanta. We're not like around LA, but we're certainly busier than we once were. And we are in a community that, when I was growing up, was probably 8,000 or 9,000 people, and you could be the only car on the road. And now you don't get to be, and you wait a few minutes.
Well, real quick before you go, how is the housing market today? Because we filmed there, it's been a couple of years.
I think that's the biggest challenge, and it's where the conflict comes from, because so many people have moved here. They've taken up existing inventory, and people who are already in our community, either they've grown and they want to start a family and buy a home, or they're older and they want to downsize, and there's just not housing available. And the housing, of course, is so much more expensive than it was just a few years ago. I mean, more than doubled in most cases.
Well, Mayor Paige Brown, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and give my best to the folks at Gallatin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right. Coming up, I've got one more important thing that you need to know. Welcome back. One thing you need to know ahead of next week: the big banks are set to kick off second quarter earnings season. JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo all reporting before the bell on Friday. Second quarter reports overall expected to be solid, with consensus estimates calling for a more than 9% jump in the S&P 500's EPS growth from second quarter of last year. Big tech, healthcare, financials, energy, and utilities all expected to show strong earnings per share. One analyst at LPL Financial says, quote, good earnings news may delay the S&P 500 pullback that we're probably overdue for. We'll be watching it all on Fox Business. And that'll do it for us here. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful 4th of July weekend. We'll see you next time.